She was humiliated and forced to leave her seat, but just minutes later, the same flight attendant who had embarrassed her had to face the consequences. No one could have predicted what happened on this flight that would change everything, not just for those on the plane, but for the entire airline. Before starting the story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from, and if you like stories like this, remember to like, share, and hit the subscribe bell for more. Naomi Collins, a poised and confident black woman, stepped onto the plane with an air of calm assurance that turned a few heads. Dressed in a tailored blazer over a sleek dress, her natural curls framed her face, exuding elegance and professionalism. In one hand, she carried a polished leather laptop bag, and in the other, her neatly printed boarding pass. Her every step down the aisle was measured, her eyes scanning seat numbers with quiet focus. Naomi's demeanor radiated composure and quiet determination, traits that subtly hinted at her strength and self-assuredness. When she reached her assigned seat in the first-class section, she smiled politely at the passenger beside her before placing her bag neatly into the overhead compartment. Settling into her seat, she retrieved a small notebook and pen from her bag and began jotting notes, fully engrossed in her work. To the other passengers, she appeared entirely at ease, her focus unbroken by the occasional glances cast her way. Though her initial interactions with the cabin crew were brief and unremarkable, Naomi's presence was hard to overlook. Her quiet confidence set her apart, yet she seemed oblivious to the attention. For her, it was just another routine flight, at least for now. Unbeknownst to her or anyone else aboard, this seemingly uneventful boarding would soon spiral into an incident that would expose systemic issues, challenge biases, and spark a series of events leading to meaningful change in place. But in that moment, Naomi remained calm, composed, and fully in control of herself. Flight attendant Rachel Simmons noticed Naomi Collins seated in first class and quickly singled her out. Despite Naomi's composed demeanor and valid boarding pass, Rachel seemed skeptical. Approaching Naomi with a polite yet firm tone, she requested to see her ticket, inspecting it closely. Although everything checked out, Rachel's expression tightened, and she asked Naomi to step aside for verification. Naomi, though surprised, complied without protest, carrying her belongings with her. Rachel led Naomi toward the galley, where she claimed there had been a mistake with her booking. When Naomi calmly pointed out that her first-class ticket was confirmed weeks prior, Rachel's tone grew colder. She insisted that the seat was inappropriate for Naomi and directed her to move to the main cabin. The words, though veiled in formality, carried an unmistakable undertone of bias. Passengers in first class exchanged puzzled glances, whispering among themselves as they observed the interaction. Naomi maintained her composure, her calm exterior masking a storm of emotions. As she walked toward the economy section, escorted by Rachel, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Naomi's grip on her bag tightened slightly, but she kept her head held high, refusing to let the humiliation visibly affect her. Upon reaching the economy section, Rachel gestured toward a crammed middle seat and left without another word. Naomi quietly settled into her new spot, her thoughts racing. She reached for her phone and began typing, her calmness unnerving to those who noticed. It was clear she was already formulating her response. While Rachel assumed the issue was resolved, Naomi's subtle yet deliberate actions hinted that the story was far from over. What had started as a dismissive act by Rachel would soon escalate into a confrontation with far-reaching consequences. Despite the blatant unfairness of the situation, Naomi Collins remained remarkably composed. Though she had been humiliated in front of other passengers and forced out of her first-class seat, she refused to let her emotions take control. Instead, she sat quietly in the cramped economy section, staring out of the window as the murmurs of curious passengers around her filled the cabin. Her calm demeanor masked the flurry of thoughts racing through her mind, and it was clear that she was already preparing her next move. Reaching into her sleek leather bag, Naomi pulled out her phone. With practiced precision, she began typing a message, her fingers moving swiftly over the screen. Her expression remained neutral, but there was a subtle determination in her eyes. The message she sent was short and cryptic, but its significance was unmistakable. She wasn't merely venting her frustration, she was activating a plan. Moments later, Naomi placed a discreet call, her voice low but steady. "Hello, it's me," she began, her tone calm but firm. "Something's happened, and I'd like it addressed immediately. No need to escalate just yet. Just monitor the situation and be ready." Her words hinted at her level of preparation and her ability to handle the issue strategically. It became clear that Naomi was not an ordinary passenger. She was someone with connections and influence, and she intended to use them. After ending the call, Naomi returned her phone to her bag and sat back, her expression unreadable. Her composed demeanor was unsettling to those who noticed her, particularly Rachel Simmons, the flight attendant who had forced her to move. Rachel, busy attending to other passengers, occasionally glanced in Naomi's direction, perhaps sensing that the matter wasn't truly over. Unbeknownst to Rachel, Naomi's actions were already setting the stage for significant consequences. Far from being defeated by the discriminatory treatment, Naomi was determined to turn the situation into an opportunity for accountability and change. Her quiet resolve would soon prove that she wasn't just a passenger, she was a force to be reckoned with. As Naomi Collins settled into her cramped economy seat, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers around her avoided direct eye contact, though their curiosity was evident. Naomi, however, appeared unfazed, her calm exterior masking the deep frustration and determination brewing inside her. Her phone remained in her hand, her fingers occasionally brushing over the screen, as if she were waiting for the perfect moment to act. It wasn't long before Clara, another flight attendant assigned to the economy section, approached Naomi. Clara's demeanor was starkly different from Rachel Simmons. She moved with a sense of care, her expression soft and understanding. Holding a cup of water, Clara leaned down slightly and addressed Naomi in a quiet voice. "Ma'am, is everything all right? You seem unsettled," she said, her concern evident. Naomi looked up and offered a small but warm smile. "Thank you for asking," she replied, her voice steady. "It's just a bit of a mix-up, but I'll manage." Her calmness reassured Clara, but it was clear to both women that the situation was more complex than Naomi let on. Clara hesitated, glancing around as if ensuring no one else was listening, before softly adding, "If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know." Naomi's smile widened slightly. "You're very kind," she said sincerely. "But I think it's something the airline will need to address." Clara nodded, sensing that Naomi had everything under control, but her lingering concern was evident. She returned to her duties, occasionally casting glances back at Naomi. Meanwhile, Naomi remained focused, her calm demeanor unshaken. She leaned back in her seat, gazing out of the window as she composed her thoughts. Every movement she made was deliberate, each action carefully calculated. She pulled out her phone again and typed another message, her lips pressing into a faint smile as she sent it. Naomi wasn't just enduring the situation, she was meticulously preparing her next move. In contrast, Rachel's behavior was growing more erratic. The first-class flight attendant occasionally glanced toward the economy cabin, her brows furrowed with tension. She seemed uneasy, as though she knew she hadn't seen the last of Naomi's response. Clara, however, remained a bright spot in Naomi's ordeal. Her genuine kindness stood out in stark contrast to Rachel's hostility. Clara's actions reminded Naomi that even in moments of prejudice or discrimination, there are those who embody professionalism and humanity. Naomi made a mental note of Clara's approach, knowing it would become relevant in the unfolding events. As the plane continued its journey, Naomi's phone buzzed softly. She glanced down at the screen, reading the brief response she had been waiting for. Her expression didn't change, but the subtle lift of her eyebrows suggested she was satisfied. Slipping the phone back into her bag, Naomi folded her hands neatly in her lap, exuding an aura of quiet control. Passengers around her were growing more aware of the tension. Some exchanged whispers while others cast sidelong glances, wondering how someone who had been so blatantly mistreated could remain so composed. What they didn't realize was that Naomi's calmness wasn't passive. It was strategic. She was ensuring that every action she took was measured, every word deliberate. Clara approached again later, this time with a light snack. "Here's something in case you're hungry," she said softly, placing the small tray on Naomi's table. Naomi looked up, meeting Clara's gaze. "Thank you, Clara. You've been very considerate," she said, emphasizing the younger woman's name. Clara's eyes widened slightly at the personal acknowledgement, and she smiled before retreating back to her duties. By this point, the tension between Rachel and Naomi was undeniable. While Rachel tried to avoid direct interaction with Naomi, her unease was evident to those around her. Clara, on the other hand, seemed to have gained Naomi's quiet approval. Naomi's calm and strategic planning continued throughout the flight, and her interactions with Clara provided a reminder of the stark contrast between professionalism and prejudice. While Rachel's hostility was driving the situation toward an inevitable confrontation, Clara's kindness had earned her an ally in Naomi. Unbeknownst to Clara, her thoughtful gestures would play a significant role in what was to come, as Naomi prepared to address the injustice with dignity and resolve. As the flight continued, the tension surrounding the situation grew more palpable. Miranda Simmons, the first-class flight attendant, carried herself with an air of authority, but couldn't shake the unease creeping into her thoughts. She knew she had been overly dismissive of Naomi Collins, yet she had rationalized her actions as necessary for maintaining order. However, deep down, she sensed that something about Naomi's calmness didn't align with the typical responses she was used to when passengers faced such treatment. It wasn't long before Miranda's instincts were proven correct. While walking briskly through the cabin, she was interrupted by a call from the airline's executive office. Dennis, another crew member, discreetly handed her the in-flight phone, his expression unreadable. "It's for you," he said simply. Miranda hesitated, noticing the phone with trembling fingers. "This is Miranda," she answered cautiously. The voice on the other end was calm but firm, belonging to a senior executive from the airline's corporate office. "Miss Simmons, we've received a formal complaint from a first-class passenger regarding an incident on this flight," the executive began. "We need you to document everything that occurred and ensure that all passengers are treated respectfully for the remainder of this journey. Additionally, we will require a full report upon landing." Miranda felt her stomach drop. A complaint? She stammered, trying to mask her rising panic. Um, may I ask what it's regarding? The executive's response was curt. We'll address the specifics later. For now, do your job and treat all passengers with professionalism. The line went dead before Miranda could respond. She stood frozen for a moment, the reality of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding she could brush aside. It was now a matter being monitored at the highest levels of the airline. Meanwhile, Naomi remained seated in the economy cabin, her demeanor as calm and composed as ever. Her phone rested in her lap, the screen dark, but it was clear that she was in no rush to escalate matters further. Every action she had taken so far, from her cryptic messages to her composed interactions, had been deliberate. She wasn't seeking immediate revenge. She was orchestrating a resolution that would leave a lasting impact. Passengers around Naomi couldn't help but notice the subtle tension surrounding her. Some exchanged whispers, wondering why such a composed woman had been treated so poorly. Others avoided eye contact, not wanting to get involved. Naomi paid them no mind. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, scrolling through her contacts and sending another brief message. The contents of the message remained a mystery to those around her, but the small, satisfied smile that played at the corners of her lips hinted that her plans were proceeding exactly as intended. In first class, Miranda's anxiety was becoming more apparent. She moved through the cabin with less precision than usual, her hands trembling slightly as she poured drinks for passengers. One passenger noticed her unease and whispered to a seatmate, "She's not herself today, is she?" Miranda overheard the comment but ignored it, focusing instead on completing her tasks without making further mistakes. At the same time, Dennis observed Miranda's behavior with a mix of concern and disapproval. He had witnessed her interactions with Naomi earlier and had noted her dismissive attitude. Now, he could see that the balance of power was shifting and Miranda was struggling to keep up. As Miranda passed by, Dennis quietly remarked, "You might want to be careful. This isn't going away." Miranda shot him a sharp look. "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped. Dennis shrugged, his expression neutral. "Just that you might have underestimated her," he said, nodding subtly in the direction of the economy cabin. Miranda clenched her jaw, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She had prided herself on her ability to handle difficult situations, but this was different. Naomi wasn't outwardly confrontational, nor was she making a scene. Instead, she was operating with an unnerving calmness that Miranda couldn't decipher. As the flight progressed, Miranda found herself glancing toward the economy section more frequently. Each time, her eyes would land on Naomi, who would occasionally meet her gaze with a look that was neither confrontational nor dismissive. It was a look of quiet confidence, a silent acknowledgement that Miranda's actions had not gone unnoticed. Naomi's calmness only served to heighten Miranda's anxiety. Every time Naomi pulled out her phone or leaned forward to type a message, Miranda felt a pang of dread. She began to realize that Naomi wasn't just another passenger. There was something about her demeanor and actions that suggested she was someone who knew exactly how to navigate situations like this. The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin, providing a backdrop to the growing tension. Miranda couldn't help but replay her earlier decisions in her mind. Had she really made such a grave mistake by assuming Naomi didn't belong in first class? The answer was becoming increasingly clear. In the economy section, Clara, the empathetic flight attendant who had earlier shown kindness to Naomi, approached her again. "Ma'am, is there anything else I can get for you?" she asked softly, her tone filled with genuine concern. The first sign of the storm came when Miranda was called aside by Dennis, another flight attendant, who handed her the in-flight phone with a curt nod. "It's for you," he said, his tone neutral but with a hint of forewarning. Miranda took the phone hesitantly, her heart already pounding. On the other end of the line was an executive from the airline's corporate office. "Miss Simmons," the voice began, professional but unmistakably firm, "we've been informed of a formal complaint lodged by a first-class passenger regarding this flight. We are monitoring the situation closely and expect you to document every action and ensure all passengers are treated respectfully going forward. A full report will be required upon landing." Miranda's breath hitched. "A formal complaint?" she repeated, trying to mask the growing panic in her voice. "May I ask what the nature of the complaint is?" "This will be addressed after the flight," the executive replied tersely. "For now, carry out your duties professionally. Consider this your first warning." The call ended abruptly, leaving Miranda frozen in place. Her usual confidence and air of control were gone, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. She returned the phone to Dennis, who watched her carefully. "Trouble?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "It's nothing I can't handle," Miranda snapped, brushing past him. But her stiff movements and furrowed brow betrayed her unease. Meanwhile, Naomi sat composed in her economy seat, her focus divided between her phone and the notebook in her lap. To an untrained eye, she might have appeared relaxed, but every movement was deliberate, every action part of a larger plan. She had already sent a series of messages and made a quiet call, ensuring the incident wouldn't be dismissed or ignored. Her calm exterior was unnerving to those who noticed her, especially Miranda. Each time Miranda glanced toward the economy cabin, her eyes would inevitably land on Naomi, who occasionally returned the gaze. Naomi's expression was unreadable, neither confrontational nor dismissive, but it carried an air of quiet authority that made Miranda feel exposed. It was as though Naomi could see through every layer of Miranda's attempts to maintain control. The airline's executive office wasn't the only factor weighing on Miranda's mind. Dennis, who had been observing the unfolding drama, approached her in the galley. "You need to tread carefully," he said, his voice low. Miranda shot him a sharp look. "I'm doing my job," she replied defensively. "Are you?" Dennis countered, crossing his arms. "Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like you've crossed someone who knows exactly how to handle this kind of situation. You might want to rethink how you're approaching this." Miranda opened her mouth to respond, but found herself at a loss for words. Dennis's calm but pointed observation struck a nerve. She walked away without replying, trying to shake off the gnawing sense that she was losing control of the narrative. In the economy cabin, Naomi continued her strategic maneuvers. She sent another brief message from her phone, her expression remaining neutral. Passengers around her were beginning to notice the subtle tension. A man seated across the aisle leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "Excuse me, but is everything all right? You seem very composed for someone who's been treated unfairly." Naomi turned to him, her expression softening into a polite smile. "Thank you for your concern," she said, her tone measured. "It's just a misunderstanding that will be resolved soon." Her response, while calm, hinted at a quiet confidence that seemed to reassure the man. He nodded and leaned back, still curious but unwilling to press further. Clara, the empathetic flight attendant who had previously shown kindness to Naomi, approached her again. "Ma'am, can I get you anything?" she asked softly. Naomi looked up, meeting Clara's gaze. "Just water, please," she said. Clara returned moments later with a fresh cup of water and a napkin. "If there's anything else you need, just let me know," Clara said warmly. "Thank you, Clara," Naomi replied, her smile genuine. "You've been very kind." Clara seemed surprised but pleased by the acknowledgement, and she walked away with a slight spring in her step. Naomi made a mental note of Clara's professionalism, knowing it would be important later. As the plane continued its journey, Miranda's unease became more evident. Her normally steady hands trembled slightly as she poured drinks for first-class passengers, spilling a few drops onto a tray. She muttered an apology, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. The tension between her and Naomi had created an undercurrent that was impossible to ignore. Miranda's discomfort grew when Dennis handed her a folded note. "The captain wants to see you," he said, his tone unreadable. "What for?" Miranda asked sharply, though her voice lacked its usual authority. Dennis shrugged. "He didn't say. Just go." Reluctantly, Miranda made her way toward the cockpit, each step feeling heavier than the last. When she returned, her expression was strained. She avoided eye contact with Dennis and resumed her duties in silence, but the cracks in her confidence were obvious. Naomi noticed Miranda's growing distress but remained focused on her own actions. She wasn't seeking personal revenge. Her goal was to address the systemic issue of bias and ensure that this type of incident wouldn't happen again. Her every move was calculated to create change, not chaos. As the flight neared its destination, the intercom chimed, and the captain's voice carried through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are stowed." The announcement signaled the final stretch of the journey, but for Miranda, it felt like the beginning of her reckoning. She knew that once the plane landed, she would have to face the consequences of her actions. Naomi, on the other hand, appeared completely at ease. She glanced at her phone one last time, sending a final message before slipping it into her bag. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to Miranda's visible tension. When the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, passengers began gathering their belongings. Miranda's hands trembled as she helped a passenger retrieve a bag from the overhead compartment. She could feel the weight of Naomi's presence behind her, even though neither of them spoke. As passengers began to disembark, Naomi waited patiently in her seat. She wasn't in a rush. She knew that the resolution to this incident was already in motion. As she finally stood to leave, she exchanged a brief, knowing glance with Clara, who nodded subtly. Naomi smiled in return, a silent acknowledgement of the younger woman's kindness. By the time Miranda stepped off the plane, she was met by uniformed security officers who requested her presence for questioning. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and Miranda knew that she was no longer in control of the narrative. Naomi's deliberate actions had not only unsettled Miranda, but also ensured that the airline would take a hard look at its policies and practices. The flight had ended, but the ripple effects of Naomi's calm, strategic response were only just beginning. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway and taxied toward the terminal, the atmosphere remained charged with an unspoken tension. While the usual sounds of passengers unbuckling their seatbelts and retrieving bags filled the cabin, a palpable undercurrent of anticipation lingered. For Miranda Simmons, the first-class flight attendant who had moved Naomi Collins to economy, every passing moment seemed heavier than the last. She couldn't shake the unease that had followed her since she received that call from the airline's executive office mid-flight. Something big was about to happen, and she could feel it. Naomi, on the other hand, remained calm and collected in her economy seat. She showed no sign of impatience, her every movement deliberate. While passengers around her hurried to gather their belongings, Naomi stayed seated, her expression serene. She reached for her bag only when the aisles began to clear, taking her time to ensure everything was in order. There was no urgency in her demeanor, but her quiet confidence suggested she knew exactly how the next steps would unfold. As passengers began to disembark, the cabin crew moved about assisting them. Clara, the kind-hearted flight attendant who had shown Naomi compassion earlier, approached her one last time. "Thank you for your patience, Miss Collins," she said softly, her genuine concern evident. Naomi smiled warmly and replied, "You've been wonderful, Clara. I won't forget your kindness." Clara hesitated for a moment, sensing there was more to Naomi than met the eye, but she eventually nodded and moved to help other passengers. Naomi's words had been simple, but the weight of their meaning hung in the air. It was clear that Naomi wasn't just a wronged passenger. She was someone who would ensure that her experience would lead to meaningful consequences. As Miranda stepped off the plane, she immediately noticed the presence of two uniformed security officers standing at the gate. Their stern expressions and commanding presence caused a ripple of whispers among the passengers who had already disembarked. Miranda's heart sank as the officers' eyes locked onto her. One of them stepped forward and asked firmly, "Are you Miranda Simmons?" And Miranda's breath hitched as she swallowed hard, her voice barely audible as she replied, "Yes, I am." "What's this about?" "We've been instructed to escort you to a private office for questioning regarding an incident on this flight," the officer said, his tone professional but unyielding. The other officer gestured for her to follow. Miranda's face flushed as a mix of humiliation and panic swept over her. She glanced around, hoping to avoid the stares of passengers and crew members, but it was too late. Dennis, her colleague, stood nearby, his expression neutral, yet unreadable. Clara, who had just exited the plane, cast her a fleeting look of sympathy before focusing her attention on helping other passengers. Miranda avoided looking in Naomi's direction, though she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her like an anchor. As the officers led Miranda away, whispers erupted among the onlookers. Some passengers exchanged knowing glances, their earlier observations about the first-class dispute now making sense. Others looked confused, but intrigued, wondering what had unfolded during the flight to lead to such a dramatic scene. Naomi, meanwhile, exited the plane at her own pace, her poise unshaken. She made her way toward the baggage claim area, where her phone buzzed softly in her bag. Pulling it out, she read the message that had just come through. "Escalation in progress. All steps being followed." A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips as she slipped the phone back into her bag. Standing at the carousel, Naomi exuded an air of quiet authority. While others around her hurried to retrieve their luggage, she stood calmly, waiting for her bag to appear. She wasn't in a rush. Everything was unfolding exactly as she had planned. When her bag finally arrived, she retrieved it with ease and headed toward the exit, her phone buzzing again as she walked. She glanced at the screen briefly and then made a quick call. "Thank you for the update," she said, her tone measured and calm. "I'll expect the full report on my desk by tomorrow morning. Please ensure all statements and footage are reviewed thoroughly before closing the case. Yes, I trust the disciplinary process will handle this appropriately. Let me know if you need anything else from me." The call was brief but conveyed everything anyone needed to know about Naomi's influence. She wasn't simply a passenger lodging a complaint. She was someone with significant connections and the ability to drive meaningful action. Her composed demeanor wasn't just a reflection of personal resilience, it was a testament to her strategic mind and the confidence of someone used to navigating high-stakes situations. In the meantime, Miranda sat in a sterile conference room within the airport, the weight of her actions bearing down on her like never before. The officers had escorted her into the room without much explanation, leaving her to wait for what felt like an eternity. Every second stretched into a minute as she replayed the events of the flight in her mind, searching for a way to justify her actions. But no matter how she framed it, she couldn't escape the realization that her assumptions and biases had led her to make a catastrophic mistake. The door finally opened and a representative from the airline's human resources team stepped in, accompanied by a security officer. The representative's expression was neutral, but there was no mistaking the gravity of the situation. "Miss Simmons," the representative began, "we've received a formal complaint regarding your treatment of a first-class passenger on Flight 287. The complaint has been escalated to our executive team, and we'll be conducting a full investigation into the matter. For now, you are suspended from duty pending the outcome of the investigation. You'll receive further details via email." Miranda's stomach dropped. "Suspended?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "But this is a serious matter," the representative cut in, her tone firm but professional. "We expect our employees to uphold the highest standards of professionalism and respect toward all passengers. The evidence we've reviewed so far suggests a failure to meet those standards." Miranda opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. Deep down, she knew there was nothing she could say to undo the damage. Her actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. As Miranda grappled with the consequences of her decisions, Naomi's car pulled smoothly away from the terminal. Sitting in the back seat, Naomi glanced out of the window, her expression calm but thoughtful. The events of the day had played out exactly as she had anticipated, and while the immediate consequences for Miranda were satisfying, Naomi's focus was on the bigger picture. She wasn't just seeking personal justice, she wanted systemic change. The airline would now have to address its policies, implement training, and ensure that incidents like this wouldn't happen again. Naomi's actions had sparked a ripple effect that would extend far beyond the confines of a single flight. For Naomi, this was never just about her. It was about setting a precedent and creating accountability. And as the car merged into the flow of traffic, she allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction, knowing that her calm resolve had turned a moment of injustice into an opportunity for meaningful progress. As the reality of the situation sank in, Miranda Simmons sat alone in a stark, windowless conference room at the airline's headquarters. The sterile white walls seemed to close in around her as she stared blankly at the table in front of her, replaying the events of the flight in her mind. The email notification of her suspension still sat open on her phone, the words burning into her consciousness. "You are hereby suspended from active duty pending the outcome of a disciplinary hearing regarding a formal complaint filed against you by a passenger on Flight 287. For years, Miranda had prided herself on her professionalism and control. She had worked hard to rise in the ranks, becoming one of the more senior flight attendants for the airline. Yet, with one decision rooted in prejudice and assumptions, her career now hung in the balance. Her treatment of Naomi Collins, a first-class passenger who she assumed did not belong, had set off a chain of events she never anticipated. Now she faced not only the loss of her job, but also the shame of her actions, becoming an example of what not to do in her profession. Miranda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her palms sweaty, as she clutched the edges of the table. She couldn't deny it any longer. Her assumptions about Naomi had been entirely baseless. The quiet, composed woman she had dismissed as unworthy of first-class treatment had turned out to be far more influential and strategic than Miranda could have imagined. The disciplinary hearing began with a panel of senior airline executives seated across from Miranda. Their expressions were professional but stern, making it clear that this was not a routine meeting. One executive, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an air of authority, began the proceedings. "Ms. Simmons, we are here today to address a formal complaint regarding your treatment of Ms. Naomi Collins, a passenger in first class on Flight 209. Miranda nodded stiffly, her throat dry. She avoided eye contact, focusing instead on the notepad in front of her where she had scribbled notes during the flight. None of it would help her now. The executive continued, "According to Ms. Collins' statement, you questioned her right to be seated in first class despite her presenting a valid boarding pass. You then removed her from her seat and reassigned her to economy, citing a mistake with her booking. Is this accurate?" Miranda's voice was barely above a whisper as she responded, "Yes, but I thought—" The executive held up a hand to stop her. "Miss Simmons, we're not here to discuss what you thought. We are here to determine whether your actions aligned with the airline's policies and standards of professionalism." Another member of the panel, a man with a measured tone, chimed in. "Did Ms. Collins violate any rules or policies that would justify her removal from first class?" Miranda hesitated. Her heart pounded as she realized there was no way to defend her actions without admitting the truth. "No, she didn't," she finally admitted, her voice trembling. "But I assumed there was a mistake." The man's expression remained impassive. "And what led you to that assumption?" The silence that followed was deafening. Miranda had no answer that wouldn't incriminate her further. She felt the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on her, and for the first time, she realized how deeply flawed her behavior had been. Her assumptions about Naomi had not only been incorrect, but rooted in implicit bias that had cost her more than she could have imagined. Meanwhile, Naomi's actions were being praised across the airline's executive office. Her calm, strategic approach to addressing the incident had impressed even the most skeptical members of the leadership team. By the time the plane landed, she had already set a series of events in motion that would ensure accountability not just for Miranda, but for the airline as a whole. During a private meeting with the airline's senior executives, Naomi had outlined her experience with precision and poise. She detailed every interaction with Miranda, from the moment she was asked to show her boarding pass to her forced relocation to economy. She provided both written documentation and audio evidence, which left no room for doubt about what had transpired. What struck the executives most was Naomi's composure. She hadn't raised her voice, caused a scene, or resorted to retaliation. Instead, she had methodically documented her experience and presented it in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Her approach left an undeniable impression. She wasn't just seeking justice for herself, but was also advocating for systemic change. Naomi's influence extended beyond the disciplinary hearing. She used her connections to push for broader accountability, suggesting the implementation of sensitivity and bias training for all airline staff. "This isn't just about me," she had told the executives during their meeting. "It's about ensuring that no passenger is ever treated this way again." Her words resonated, and the airline's leadership took immediate action. Not only was Miranda's behavior under scrutiny, but the incident also prompted a review of the company's training programs and policies. Publicly, the airline committed to making changes that would reflect its commitment to diversity, inclusion, and respect for all passengers. Back in the hearing room, Miranda sat silently as the panel discussed the evidence. Each statement they read, each piece of testimony they reviewed, only deepened her sense of regret. She realized now how profoundly she had underestimated Naomi. What Miranda had dismissed as quiet compliance had been a calculated effort to ensure justice. The hearing concluded with a final statement from the lead executive. Ms. Simmons, your actions on Flight 218 were unacceptable and do not align with the values or standards of this airline. As a result, your employment with the company will be terminated, effective immediately. Additionally, this incident will be documented in your employment record. Miranda felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The career she had spent years building was over in an instant, undone by her own biases and poor judgment. She wanted to protest, to explain herself, but she knew it would be futile. The facts spoke for themselves. As Miranda left the room, she felt the full weight of her actions settle on her shoulders. She thought about Naomi, the composed woman she had wronged, and realized how vastly she had underestimated her. Naomi hadn't just stood up for herself, she had set a precedent that would ripple across the entire airline. Meanwhile, Naomi sat in her office, reviewing the preliminary report on the changes the airline was implementing. Her calm, strategic planning had not only held Miranda accountable, but also paved the way for broader progress. She didn't dwell on Miranda's downfall. Her focus was on the future and ensuring that her experience would lead to lasting change. In the end, Miranda's prejudice and assumptions had cost her everything. For Naomi, however, the incident was a testament to the power of resilience, composure, and thoughtful action in the face of injustice. Her quiet strength had turned a moment of discrimination into a catalyst for transformation, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had. In the weeks following the incident on Flight 287, the airline announced sweeping changes that reverberated throughout its organization. The executives, pushed into action by Naomi Collins' composed yet unyielding demand for accountability, unveiled a new initiative focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. At the heart of the reform was the implementation of mandatory sensitivity and bias training for all staff, from flight attendants to upper management. The decision marked a significant turning point for the company, which publicly acknowledged that the treatment of Naomi Collins had revealed gaps in its culture and policies. In a statement, the CEO addressed the broader implications of the incident. "We deeply regret the experience Ms. Collins endured on Flight 287. While this was an isolated incident, it has underscored the need for systemic change. Our commitment is to ensure all passengers, regardless of background, feel valued and respected." Naomi watched the changes unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and quiet determination. Her goal had never been about punishment alone. It was about ensuring that no one else would have to face the same humiliation she experienced. By handling the situation with grace and strategy, Naomi had not only held those responsible accountable, but also used her influence to drive meaningful reform. One of her first actions after the incident was to submit a formal commendation for Clara, the empathic flight attendant who had shown her kindness during the ordeal. Naomi knew the value of recognizing those who exemplified professionalism and humanity, especially in moments of adversity. "Clara was a bright light in an otherwise dark experience," Naomi wrote in her report to the airline's executive team. "Her actions demonstrated the compassion and respect that every passenger deserves. She handled a difficult situation with grace and empathy, and her professionalism should serve as a model for others." The recognition did not go unnoticed. Clara was called into a meeting with the airline's senior management, where she was praised for her conduct during the flight. To her surprise, she was offered a promotion to a senior flight attendant role, a move that reflected the company's renewed focus on rewarding exemplary behavior. When Clara received the news, she was overwhelmed with gratitude. "I was just doing what felt right," she said during the meeting, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't expect anything in return." One of the executives smiled and replied, "It's because of people like you that we know change is possible. Miss Collins herself made sure your efforts were recognized." Hearing Naomi's name brought tears to Clara's eyes. She hadn't interacted with Naomi much, beyond their brief exchanges during the flight, but she had sensed the woman's quiet strength and determination. Knowing that Naomi had gone out of her way to highlight her actions was deeply humbling. For Naomi, recognizing Clara was just one part of the broader change she hoped to inspire. She remained actively involved in the airline's reform process, offering insights and feedback as the company rolled out its sensitivity and bias training program. The sessions were designed to challenge employees to confront their unconscious biases and reflect on how their actions could impact passengers and colleagues alike. The training included real-life case studies, one of which was based on Naomi's experience. Though her name was anonymized, the details were unmistakable. The case study highlighted the importance of treating every passenger with dignity and respect, regardless of assumptions or appearances. Employees were required to engage in role-playing exercises, open discussions, and self-assessments, fostering an environment where accountability and growth were encouraged. Feedback from early sessions indicated that the program was both challenging and transformative, prompting many participants to reevaluate their own behaviors and biases. As the airline worked to rebuild its reputation, Naomi's influence extended beyond the corporate office. Her handling of the incident had attracted widespread attention, with media outlets praising her composure and calling her a catalyst for change. While Naomi chose not to engage directly with the press, she used her platform to advocate for broader industry reforms. "This isn't just about one airline," Naomi said during a private meeting with industry leaders. "It's about creating a culture where everyone, passengers and employees alike, feels valued and respected. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with acknowledging the problem and committing to doing better." Her words resonated, sparking conversations across the aviation industry about the importance of addressing bias and fostering inclusivity. Several other airlines began reviewing their own policies in response, recognizing that the fallout from Flight 287 had set a new standard for accountability. For Clara, the changes brought a renewed sense of purpose to her work. In her new role as a senior flight attendant, she became a vocal advocate for professionalism and compassion among her colleagues. Drawing from her own experience with Naomi, Clara encouraged her peers to approach every passenger interaction with empathy, regardless of appearances or assumptions. "I learned a lot from Ms. Collins," Clara shared during a training session she helped lead. "Her grace under pressure reminded me that even in the most difficult situations, kindness and respect can make all the difference. It's not just about following policies, it's about treating people with humanity." Her words left a lasting impression on her colleagues, many of whom approached her afterward to express their appreciation. Clara's influence became a cornerstone of the airline's evolving culture, proving that even small acts of compassion could have ripple effects far beyond the moment. For Naomi, the experience on Flight 287 had been deeply personal, but the changes it inspired were far-reaching. She continued to receive updates from the airline's executive team about the progress of their initiatives, and each report affirmed that her efforts had not been in vain. While she had never sought recognition for herself, knowing that her actions had sparked meaningful reform brought her a quiet sense of fulfillment. On a rare day off, Naomi reflected on how the ordeal had unfolded. It hadn't been easy to remain calm in the face of such blatant prejudice, but her resolve to handle the situation strategically had paid off. By focusing on the bigger picture, she had turned an injustice into an opportunity for growth, not just for herself, but for countless others who would benefit from the changes she had inspired. Her thoughts drifted back to Clara, whose kindness had been a rare source of comfort during the flight. Naomi smiled, knowing that people like Clara were the key to creating a more inclusive and compassionate world. In recognizing Clara's actions, Naomi had hoped to send a message. Even in moments of darkness, small acts of humanity could light the way toward progress. As Naomi prepared to move forward with her life, she carried with her the knowledge that she had made a difference. The incident on Flight 287 was a reminder of the power of resilience, composure, and thoughtful action in the face of adversity. It was a lesson she hoped would continue to resonate long after the flight had landed. For Naomi, this was never just about one flight or one airline. It was about setting a precedent, creating accountability, and proving that even the most difficult situations could lead to meaningful change. And in that moment, as she closed her notebook and prepared for the next chapter, she felt a quiet certainty. Her journey was far from over, and the impact of her actions would continue to be felt for years to come. Naomi Collins' actions on Flight 287 became the catalyst for profound institutional change within the airline and beyond. The incident, which began with blatant prejudice and disrespect, ended with a commitment to accountability, inclusivity, and progress. Thanks to Naomi's calm composure and strategic approach, the airline implemented mandatory sensitivity and bias training for all employees, transforming its internal culture and setting a new standard for the industry. Among those positively impacted was Clara, the empathetic flight attendant who had treated Naomi with kindness and professionalism during the ordeal. Recognizing Clara's actions, Naomi personally advocated for her commendation. Clara's promotion to a senior flight attendant role not only acknowledged her integrity, but also highlighted the airline's newfound focus on rewarding employees who exemplify compassion and respect. As Naomi reflected on the journey, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. What began as an experience of humiliation had turned into an opportunity for growth and transformation, not just for the airline, but for the industry as a whole. Her actions had sparked meaningful reform, ensuring that future passengers would not face the same treatment. The video concludes with a message of resilience and determination, celebrating Naomi's ability to turn adversity into progress. Her story serves as a reminder that standing firm with grace and purpose can inspire lasting change, proving that even in moments of injustice, there lies the potential for transformation. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the follow bell for more stories like this. See you soon in the next section.